Donald Trump has created a trap for himself. He insisted that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open and that Iran's enriched uranium must be surrendered. On both counts, the Iranians have said no, clearly, consistently, and without hesitation. So here we are, an immovable object. Nobody can move, and the longer this drags on, the more exposed we become, not just militarily, but strategically, financially, and historically. Let me be direct about what has happened. We expended enormous quantities of money, missiles, and munitions against Iran. We failed. We failed to make a serious dent in Iranian defenses. And in the meantime, the Iranians have replenished their stocks, resupplied, and are probably in better operational shape now than when this conflict began. Every strike we launched taught them something. They know roughly where our forces will attack from. They know what weapons and munitions we will employ. When your enemy has studied you as thoroughly as Iran has studied us, launching new attacks is not just costly, it is strategically reckless. And yet the rhetoric coming out of Washington tells a different story entirely. We are told America won. We are told Iran knows it lost. We are told the Iranian armed forces have been defeated. All of it is nonsense. Iran was never a maritime power to begin with. They never had a great fleet of ships. What they had and still have is a sophisticated asymmetric capability, robotic small boats, undersea mines, and the ability to strike anything transiting the strait with tactical ballistic missiles and unmanned systems. There is no conventional navy to destroy, as we understand the term in the West. Iran hasn't had much of an air force since the Shah departed. So when our officials stand before cameras and declare victory over the Iranian armed forces, they are not analyzing a war. They are managing a narrative. The intelligence community knows the truth. The frustration inside those buildings is real. The officers doing honest assessments are not telling Washington what Washington wants to hear, and Washington doesn't want to hear it. What the president is doing right now, the delays, the pauses, the shifting tone, is not strategic patience. He is thrashing around, trying to find some exit from this that does not make him look foolish. And that is a very difficult problem to solve when you have already told the world, on the record, that you will not accept enriched uranium remaining in Iran, and that the Strait of Hormuz must open on American terms. Those are not negotiating positions. Those are ultimatums, and the Iranians have answered them. This is not unprecedented in American history. This is, in fact, typically American. Go back to Vietnam. When our forces first landed, the units that went ashore didn't know what they were supposed to do. They hadn't been given a clear mission. There was no specific objective to attack. A strategic decision had been made to commit American military power to supposedly defeat communism, but none of the people executing that decision knew what it meant or how to accomplish it. We wasted billions of dollars, lost tens of thousands of American lives, killed 2 million people in the process, and gained nothing. Then in 2003, we went back into Iraq with no clear, unambiguous goals, no coherent strategy. Someone was asked why we didn't bring more troops to occupy Iraq. The answer was that we never intended to occupy Iraq. That decision was made after we arrived. Go back even further. When Eisenhower received his mission from Roosevelt in World War II, it was simply land on the European continent and destroy the German armed forces. Everybody applauded. But where do you want to be when the war ends? Where do you meet the Soviets? Are you heading to Berlin or Warsaw? Nobody did the homework. We muddled through. We have always told our armed forces, just get in and then figure it out. Paul Wolfowitz said it plainly in 2003. We don't want to fight with the generals. We just want to get the army into Iraq. And then the assumption was they would manage. Nothing has changed. The president says he wants regime change in Iran. When that didn't materialize, when the internal rebellion never came, when the millions of Iranians who supposedly hate their government failed to rise up, the mission shifted. Now we hear talk of destroying Iran entirely. Iran, 93 million people, a nation the size of Western Europe. What does that even mean? What do you destroy first? How long does it last? How much does it cost? How many Americans come home in boxes? These are questions that should have been asked before the first missile was fired. They were not asked because people in Washington assumed this would resemble Iraq. Flat open desert, limited urban centers, a population with no deep attachment to the state, a military that would fold quickly. Iran is not an Arab state. That level of ignorance and arrogance is breathtaking, and it is not new. The mother of all strategic failures always begins with bad assumptions. Now we come to the question of who is actually driving this war. Let me say something that most people in positions like mine are reluctant to say on camera, but it must be said plainly. The Jewish financial power in the United States is the elephant in the room. In the absence of that financial and political influence, would we be at war with Iran? No, absolutely not. During Vietnam, people were told communism must be stopped or it would come to our shores. That argument resonated. During the Gulf War, the argument was that we could not allow Saddam Hussein to capture the Arabian Peninsula and control global energy. People understood that. Here, the American public has never been given a coherent, credible reason why destroying Iran serves American national interests. Because it doesn't. This war is being fought on the basis of Israeli demand. The Israelis demanded we support them. Trump made promises. Enormous quantities of money were donated to his campaign by very wealthy individuals who support Israel unconditionally. He is honoring those promises. He has presided over an Israel First administration, not an America First administration, and that distinction will ultimately be what defines his presidency and what destroys it. Netanyahu, for his part, is not subtle about this. He has stated clearly that only he will decide when the war against Iran ends. He has demanded that uranium be physically removed from Iran. His words, "You go in and take it out, that is the best way. There is still work to be done." These are not the words of an ally offering counsel. These are instructions. The same Congress that gave Trump a standing ovation when he declared Iran would never have a nuclear weapon is controlled by the same financial power that controls the executive. People on Capitol Hill will eventually reach a moment of self-preservation where they turn on this president. That moment will come, but it has not come yet. And what of Israel's own nuclear arsenal? Israel possesses nuclear weapons. Everyone with any knowledge of the subject knows this. Israel operates entirely outside the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel is not subjected to the same IAEA obligations imposed on every other nation in the region. And yet, we are told this entire regional crisis exists because of Iran's nuclear program, a program that Trump himself said was obliterated in June 2025. Less than a year later, we are being told the war must resume because of Iranian nuclear capability. The contradiction is not examined. The double standard is not questioned. The reason is simple. The existence of the Jewish state is bound in American political consciousness to the memory of the Holocaust. That history has been converted into a permanent exemption from the standards applied to every other nation on earth. Israel had a chance to become a normal nation in the Middle East. It chose not to. It chose instead to be exceptional and then to weaponize that exceptionalism until American military power became the instrument of Israeli regional dominance. That is what we are doing, and it is not working. What Israel does not appear to understand or refuses to accept is that Iran is not its most consequential long-term challenge. Iran is not, by nature, an aggressive martial power. It is a civilizational state with its own ancient history, its own strategic culture, and its own sense of dignity. It has not pursued regional conquest in 1,000 years. There was always a possibility, a slim one but real, of arriving at arrangements that suited both countries. I said this directly to a gathering of senior Israeli military officers in 2020. I told them that Iran should not be their primary focus, that the power they are underestimating is Turkey. Turkey is a very different kind of challenge. The neo-Ottoman resurgence is not rhetoric, it is strategic doctrine. The Blue Homeland Doctrine, which Turkey is now formally codifying into law, is a direct challenge to Greek and Cypriot maritime rights across the eastern Mediterranean. Greece is already preparing contingency plans, and Israel, which has openly threatened Turkey, which has already made clear it views Ankara as a major obstacle to its regional ambitions, has not properly reckoned with Turkish military capability and political will. I tried to tell them in 2020, you must make friends with one of the two major powers pressing against you. If you do not, you will be ground to pieces between them. Egypt, the largest Arab country in the world, and Turkey have a certain convergence of interest. It is called the elimination of Israel. You cannot call your neighbors subhuman and expect them to love you. You cannot wage offensive war across the entire region and expect the Islamic world to remain passive indefinitely. NATO, in this context, is a zombie organization. It is essentially dead and walking. It has died on the battlefields of Ukraine, where enormous quantities of Western money, technology, and equipment have been poured in and have not produced the result anyone promised. Ukraine will collapse this year. The Russians will bring that war to a military conclusion, and there is nothing in Europe capable of preventing it. Germany, the one European state that truly matters, is about to bring a nationalist government to power, one that considers the Ukraine war a catastrophe and NATO increasingly irrelevant. That government will eventually demand American forces leave German soil. We are working overtime through the CIA, through the National Endowment for Democracy, through every instrument of soft and covert power we possess to prevent that outcome. It will not be enough. What is happening in Lebanon must also be stated clearly. Israel is subjecting Lebanon to the same treatment it has applied in Gaza. There is a new term for it: Gazification, the systematic conversion of a neighboring territory into a depopulated desert that can then be reshaped according to Israeli preference. Villages in South Lebanon are being leveled through controlled detonations and bulldozers, and these demolitions are incentivized and monetized by the Israeli government. Daily phosphorus attacks, a weapon banned under international law, drone strikes, hospitals bombed, ambulances destroyed, paramedics killed, Israeli ministers openly calling for settlement of South Lebanon, land in the occupied zone being advertised online at $80,000 a plot, evacuation orders now reaching as far as Tyre and Sidon, well outside any defensible security perimeter. This is not a temporary security operation. This is the Greater Israel Doctrine in active execution, and the American public knows almost none of it, not because they are incapable of understanding, but because the media they consume does not show it to them. Understanding why the mainstream media doesn't show it means understanding who dominates and controls the mainstream media. The same financial power demanding war with Iran. When I speak to people my age, people who grew up in this country who consider themselves informed, they say they haven't heard any of this. I tell them it is time to look beyond mainstream media. The narrative is controlled, and the narrative favors Israel, and anyone who challenges that narrative is branded an anti-Semite. I have been to Israel many times. I do not hate Jews. I do not hate Israelis. I have never objected to helping Israel defend itself. Defending oneself is entirely different from what is happening. Israel is not defending itself. Israel is the aggressor. What happened on October 7th was allowed to happen. That is becoming increasingly obvious, and it was exploited to trigger a regional war that has been in planning for years. Large numbers of Americans have been conditioned over decades to feel contempt for Arabs, to dismiss what happens to them as something that happens to people who somehow deserve it. They hear that Christians are being murdered in Lebanon and they assume it must be Muslims doing the killing. But many of the people being killed in Lebanon and Gaza are Christians, and the Muslim Arabs living alongside them are not oppressing them. That is not the narrative being broadcast, so most Americans never encounter it. This is not an excuse. It is an explanation of the conditions under which this war is being sustained without meaningful domestic opposition. But conditions change. Trump's polling numbers are in freefall, worse right now than Nixon's in the final stages of Watergate. If he restarts this war in full, if he goes back and strikes Iran with the force being prepared, he may not be president by the end of the year. If he stops and admits the strategy has failed, he will be damaged but not destroyed. The average American, if told plainly that we are coming home and fixing our own country, will say, "Thank God." The problem is that Trump has locked himself into positions that make retreat feel like humiliation. He cannot declare victory. He said no enriched uranium. He said the strait must open. Neither has happened. Neither will happen on his terms. And the people financing his political existence will not allow him to simply walk away. So I believe he will restart the war. I believe that is where this is headed. Not because it is rational, not because the intelligence supports it, not because any military assessment recommends it, but because he is operating on pure emotion and what he believes is self-interest. He is a product of Roy Cohn's school of combat: always attack, never retreat, deny everything unfavorable, and no matter what happens, declare victory. The problem is that this time victory is not available. We have already lost the strategic initiative. We have depleted significant portions of our missile stockpiles. We are overextended. 250,000 troops spread across the globe, commitments we cannot afford and cannot sustain, all structured to maintain a global military hegemony that made some sense in the post-World War II order and makes no sense now. If we go back in, and I believe we will, it will fail again. More expended munitions, more money gone, more damage to our credibility, and the consequences will not stay contained to the Persian Gulf. The Strait of Hormuz supplies energy to Europe, to Japan, to South Korea, to Southeast Asia. Another round of destruction in the Gulf will take 10 years to recover from. It will drive inflation, famine, and political instability across multiple continents. It will exhaust us at home in ways that will force a reckoning we have been postponing for decades. After Vietnam, we went home. We didn't discuss the failure for years. It was only in the 1980s that people began to say publicly what many had known privately since the 1970s, that it was a catastrophe, that we should never do it again. We are a maritime and aerospace power. When things go badly, we come home. We change the subject. We wait for the wound to close in public memory, and then we begin again somewhere else, repeating the same fundamental errors because we have never created a culture of accountability in our senior military leadership. Our generals have basked for 80 years in the afterglow of World War II. Every man with 2 or 3 stars gets compared to Patton or Nimitz. These people are not the same. There is no connectivity whatsoever. And a general who arrives in Washington of modest means and retires a multimillionaire, you don't have to look very hard to understand how that happens. The think tanks, the defense contractors, the revolving door. Eisenhower warned the nation about this before he left office. He called it the military-industrial complex. He originally included Congress in that phrase, but his aides told him to remove it. He was right to include it. The system cannot reform itself. The financial interests are too entrenched, the incentives too powerful, the accountability too absent. What will force a change is not a policy debate. What will force a change is pain, economic pain, felt by ordinary Americans, at a scale that cannot be managed or redirected by media narrative. They pay attention when energy is unaffordable, when food is unaffordable, when the financial system stops working, when 2,000 or 3,000 Americans come home dead. That is when the country demands accountability. We are not at that moment yet, but we are closer to it than at any point in my lifetime. And the next phase of this conflict, which is coming, will bring us closer still. What I can tell you with confidence, drawn from a lifetime of studying warfare and the nations that wage it, is this: neither Russia nor China will allow Iran to be destroyed. If Iran looks like it might genuinely collapse, we must reckon seriously with the possibility of Russian or Chinese intervention to prevent it. Those conversations between Trump and Xi, between Trump and Putin, we do not know what was said, but the consequences of miscalculation at that level are not regional. They are civilizational. Israel is in its 11th hour. It is a few minutes before midnight. A sudden American withdrawal from the region would probably mean the end of the Israeli state as currently configured, because we will not rebuild the bases we have lost in the Gulf. That would cost hundreds of billions of dollars. It is not going to happen. And so from Israel's perspective, the war against Iran must succeed, because the alternative is an eventual confrontation with Turkey, with Egypt, with a region that is run out of patience and has nothing left to lose in tolerating Israeli regional aggression. The question is not whether we were right to be concerned about nuclear weapons in the Middle East. The question is whether we have the honesty to apply that concern consistently to every nation, without exception, without historical exemption. We do not. And until we do, we will continue to fight wars that serve someone else's interests, paid for with American money and American lives, executed without strategy, and ended without victory. I have watched this country fight war after war without knowing why it was fighting. without a coherent plan for what success looks like, and without any meaningful consequence for the men who designed and championed the failures. That is not a military problem. It is a political and cultural one, and it will not be solved by another strike package, another deployment, or another press conference where someone stands up and tells the American people that we have won. We have not won. We are not winning. And if we go back in, we will lose again.